Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Sirhan on X, coming to you live from Cincinnati, Ohio, in the United States of America. Hope everyone had themselves a wonderful weekend and a wonderful 2nd of June of the calendar year 2025. And it is summer weather finally starting to arrive here. It's supposed to be in the 80s the rest of the week. Some storms might be coming along the way here in Cincinnati, but we finally got the warm weather we've been waiting for probably the last month, because there's been times where it felt like it was fall or like early winter for the most of the time here in the city over the past several weeks. But we're finally getting the warm weather, and we finally got a chance to step outside and enjoy ourselves a little bit. Hope everyone over here from my part of town is also. And let's get this thing started here right off the bat. Such a bit of a somber note. It was John Brenkus, the guy who hosted the standout series, The Sports Science on ESPN, who passed away over the night. Before every of these computer nerds got crazy over analytics and advanced stats or whatever the heck you want to call it. You know, those guys over in Cincinnati who have glasses as big as my head and look like Steve Urkel on cocaine. The show, the Sports Science, had a unique perspective on how analytics work, and they used video footage to basically break down each segment and did it to almost perfection. And the host of that was none other than John Brenkus. We can say that him and that show was ahead of its time when you talk about it. I mean, they talk about the velocity of a football shown on a play where Aaron Rodgers threw a pass to Jordy Nelson way back when on a clip. And they talk about the player speeds, players' spots, players, how they become today compared to what it was in the past, using metrics and actually using video footage to compute those metrics and explain those metrics to almost mere perfection. And that's what made that show just a stellar hit. And especially for the younger generation who came home after school, wanted to watch that show, it was a hit sensation, and they did a marvelous job, better than those guys at PFF in Cincinnati, when it comes to advanced metrics and basically advanced technology, how it works, how to break down, crunch everything down, and make things understandable for the casual fan to understand how they compute such numbers and particular stats and all of the metrics that come with it. It was just a stellar show. And it's unfortunate we lost one of the key pieces to it. Turned out the guy was battling with depression not too long ago, and they say that may have been the cause of it. I'm not going to divulge into it. That's why I've always said my shows make self-care your number one priority. But that show was a second to none, just a phenomenal hit series. That was, of course, way before all of these networks decided to take what he did and ran with it and turn it into some retort of an idiotic display of their own shows and their own narratives in a way that doesn't match up to what the Sports Science showed when it was around earlier in this 21st century. May him and his family find peace and solace in this difficult time. But before all these morons in PFF and Cincinnati came around, it was the Sports Science. The Sports Science was a hit. I mean, they even took a minute to talk about how Joey Chestnut eat hot dogs. That's to tell you how they compute this stuff, and they did a marvelous job. Thank you for everything, John Brenkus. What a hell of a series that show was. May God rest your soul. Now to the NFL. A little shocker out of Detroit today. It was the retirement of center Frank Ragnow, one of the premier interior linemen in the entire NFL. At the timing was a little odd, but it's sort of a blow for the Lions as they were trying to get ready for their training camps in their season, because he's a centerpiece of how the Lions offensive front works, especially talk about Penny Sewell at the tackles position. They did draft Tate Rutledge out of Georgia, and they must think he might be a good fit. Of course, there was a rumor there was a contract dispute that was going on, which I don't know nothing about. I don't read on much of the details as a lot of people do. But it's sort of surprising that this happened. And basically, I guess he didn't attend camp or whatever it is. Maybe some of my Lions fans and my Detroit followers can help me out with this, because it's a bit of a head scratcher, because he's a fixture for that offensive line in Detroit. We consider how they've had a success over the last couple of years with that offense. I mean, ability to protect Jared Goff and able to find his targets like Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, among others. But they did draft Tate Rutledge, a at a second round, which is a pretty good draft pick at that position for them. I guess they must think he might be able to plug in to be ready to go. Who knows? Timing of this is a little odd at this time of day, and everyone still wondering what the reasons for it is. Guess there was some article from A to Z Sports, who I give no credit to because they like to flop out engagement bait information, saying that it was due to a contract dispute. Nobody knows. We'll find out in due time, but sort of a blow for the Lions. But I think they'll pick themselves up. They'll be ready for the training camp and the season. Everybody's saying they were going to be a lock to win the NFC North. Problem is, 3 teams in that division won 10-plus games, and you're supposed to have an improving Chicago Bears team this year. So whoever wins that division is not going to win it going away, or it's going to be a lock. I mean, a lot of people thought the Lions were going to have this thing on lockdown. I didn't think so, because remember, 3 teams in that division won at least 10 games and made the playoffs. That division is going to be a slobber knocker. And now you talk about an improved Chicago Bears team with Ben Johnson on the coaching staff, who may help develop Caleb Williams maybe to something of significance. We'll see where that one goes. But this foregone conclusion that the Lions were a lock to win the North before this, I don't know who came up with it, because it never was a lock. They probably were the favorites to win the division because they won it the last year. But I don't know about a lock, because Minnesota was knocking on the door. The only difference between the two was Detroit won both regular season meetings. And basically, that was basically the tiebreaker right there. You know, Minnesota has an approved roster. Green Bay is going to be in the mix should Jordan Love stay healthy, because he's as good at anyone at the quarterback position, especially in the NFC. And you have an approved Chicago team who's going to get better. The NFC North is going to be a dogfight, and the matchup between those 4 teams throughout the season is going to be, I wouldn't be surprised if they split down the middle when it comes to division records, because the NFC North is going to be a real black and blue division this year. But surprising that Ragnow retired today, it was a bit of a head scratcher of the timing of it, but Detroit will be fine. It's going to be a tough division regardless. Now to another case of people wanting to use stats in the most irresponsible and understandable ways. This comes from, once again, everyone's favorite topic, the Bengals offensive line. Everybody's still trying to bail out Joe Burrow because he has a bad offensive line. This comes from an individual named Warren Sharp, an individual who has a porn stash reminiscent of the 80s and likes to read off teleprompters a la Joe Biden. He's talking about the OL rank in pass block win rate, which I don't know what comes up with that stat, because whoever comes up with that stat needs to be go check for CTE, because that's a definition of next level stupid, because I don't know what that stat is. Trying to say the Bengals were 30th and 20th, 21 and 22, 27th and 23, and dead last season. First of all, in 21 and 22, they had a deep run in the playoffs with it. So don't try that with me. I mean, I'm not hearing it, especially from him. Second of all, it's just a case of people trying to give a $300 million quarterback a pass that he doesn't deserve, because that's what we have here again. I said once he signed the contract, everything changed. And now we have people like him, especially in the Bengals fan community, who's still ongoing with this, who act like this guy can't do no wrong. And I'm going to dig into this here a little bit, because here's a bit of a something nobody wants to talk about. This one, I'll say, has a little credibility to it. His average throw time was less than 2.5 seconds. He's apparently been hit 148 times over the last 4 years. And when he's defenders in less than 2.5 seconds, and that's by far the most in the NFL. Second most is 119. Well, first of all, part of it is because the guy thinks he's a second coming of Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson and tries to make plays when he shouldn't. He doesn't know how to just kill a possession to throw the ball away. And, of course, that helps when you have two number one wide receivers to bail them out. Is a lot of it on the offensive line? Yes. Yeah, they are terrible. I'm not saying that they're the wall that the 90s Cowboys had with Nate Newton and them guys protecting Troy Aikman and opening holes for Emmitt Smith. That's a different category. But let's not act like, Joe Burrow gets a pass because all of this is happening. He's just responsible for what's happened to him as that offensive line. I mean, you're paying a man $275 million plus to get the job done, and he hasn't. That's what it comes down to. Last 2 years, they missed the playoffs, and he basically said it himself today. The reason why we missed the playoffs is because I got to play better. And that's something Bengals fans and those super fans don't want to accept, because he just came out and admitted that something that I said all along, that he should be playing better. He should be learning how to trust his teammates a lot better. Play calling should be better all the way around. I don't want to hear about a bad defense, because now once you sign all of that money to those 3 players, the platform has changed. I already knew going the last 2 seasons, after you let Jesse Bates walk, your defense was going to be a laughingstock. And that's why I never decided to partake in this ideology of you having a bad defense as a reason why you missed the playoffs. No, because I knew you guys were going to have a bad defense. And I've seen greater quarterbacks lead teams to playoff appearances, Super Bowl appearances, and even the case of Peyton Manning in 2006, a Super Bowl win. So spare me this ideology that the defense is the reason why the Bengals missed the playoffs the last 2 seasons, because I already knew that was going to happen. Here's another problem with that. Actually, I'm going to trace back a stat real quick before I conclude with this. The 1984 season, the Miami Dolphins were dead last in run yards allowed. I mean, they were just as bad as the Bengals defense was the last 2 seasons against the run. I mean, they allowed close to 5 yards a carry. We're talking about 28 teams at that time. 28 teams, 16-game schedule. What do they do that season? They make the Super Bowl. And who was a quarterback? Dan Marino, one of the real all-time greats. And we have people in Cincinnati who think Joe Burrow is greater than Dan Marino. That's another topic for another day. I'm not going to entertain it. But they lose the Super Bowl to San Francisco because Joe Montana was on the other side. That's another topic. 2018, the Kansas City Chiefs had a bottom 5 defense, made it to the AFC title game against the New England Patriots. And if it wasn't for the D Ford offsides, the Kansas City Chiefs might have made it to the Super Bowl, might have won a ring also. And who was a quarterback on that one? The premier quarterback right now, Patrick Mahomes. And I mentioned 2006, the Indianapolis Colts had a terrible defense. And what happened there? They found a way to muck it up and get to the Super Bowl and win it. And who was a quarterback there? Peyton Manning. Reason why I bring this up, don't flunk stats when it comes to the fact that you're just paying a quarterback and 2 wide receiver number ones close to $600 million from now to the end of the decade, and you're not capable enough to get the job done. It's all about the results now. I mean, I quit trying to engage in anything the Bengals and the Bengals community wants to say about this particular topic, simply because they don't know how to listen. They don't know how to read into details. They don't understand the concept of results. And it trickles down all the way up to ownership as also. I mean, I've already knew this for 30 years. Certain things you're not going to get by me with, because right now I want to see results. I mean, we went to the Super Bowl 2021. We had a great winning streak going to Kansas City for the AFC title game in 22. And what's happened since then? You let Jesse Bates walk. You sign Orlando Brown Jr. You give the contract extensions to Burrow, Chase, and Higgins. And what's happened ever since? You guys' stocks started to plummet faster than Enron at this point. And we know what happened to Enron when their stocks plummeted. That's where this is about to head if things don't change and change real fast. No, I don't want to hear about a bad defense. No, I don't want to hear a bad offensive line. You invested and you wanted Burrow, Chase, and Higgins to be paid the dollar figure they are. You got it. Now shut up and deliver results. That's what it's come down to. I don't care about the phony stance like what Warren Sharp or any of them have to say about pass block win rate, because that has nothing to do why the Bengals are failing. You pay 3 players the equivalent of $600 million from now to the end of the decade. Bring home some of the Lombardi trophies. That's all that matters right now. Glad I can get that off my chest. Now, earlier today, as we switch on to the NBA, it was the firing of Tom Thibodeau of the New York Knicks. A little bit of a head scratcher there because they just went to the conference finals. My guess is, I guess it was time for a change or something, I guess. But he plays 5 guys and runs them down to the ground, and that's how his mantra has been, going back to when he coached at Chicago. I mean, that's been the story during that time when they had guys like Derrick Rose, Jimmy Butler, and Joakim Noah going head-to-head with the Miami Heat with LeBron, Wade, and Bosh for many of those years. Just a little bit of a surprise that this happened. I know a lot of Knicks fans are elevated because I guess they weren't fond of Thibodeau and his substitution methods. But really, ever since he was Doc Rivers' right-hand man when he won the NBA title in Boston back in 2008, and when he became a head coach, he's had good regular season success, but postseason success, I mean, he's gone I'm correct, only 2 conference finals appearances in 2011 with Chicago and this past year with New York. So he doesn't have much to worry about. Great regular season coach, maybe can get you at the point if you want to go from knocking the door from the playoffs and going into the playoffs, maybe you hire a Tom Thibodeau. But if you're talking about going to the next level, maybe winning a championship level, there's probably some others out there. My guess is New York is going to try and look into that and see what they can find so they could find a way to get to the next level. Now, they made 2 major investments in Mikal Bridges, forking out all those draft picks to get him. And, of course, Karl Anthony Towns from Minnesota. I mean, they got the win over Boston. I know Boston fans, being the delusional D-bags they are, like to complain about being shorthanded. The problem was you weren't beating New York even when you were healthy because you were going to go down 3-1 before Jason Tatum went down, and that series was going to be pretty much over. But how the Knicks lost the 6-game series, especially laying an egg in Game 6 in Indiana when the series was over, that was probably the final straw for Tom Thibodeau. He'll probably land his feet somewhere, hopefully. But I get that the Knicks probably want to take the next step because they know next season Boston's probably going to retool and probably be back. Maybe who knows what's going to happen with Philadelphia with Joel Embiid and Paul George with their injury situations. So that's where we stand with all of that. Sort of surprising that it happened, but I get it. It's New York, and New York has some crazy and weird and odd expectations. Now, speaking of the NBA in Indiana, they punched the tickets over the weekend to go to Oklahoma City for the NBA Finals. This series, I get everyone is going to go say it's going to be a whitewash for Oklahoma City. I picked them in 5. But I just want to throw one caution at you. Rick Carlisle, the head coach of the Indiana Pacers, was the head coach of the Dallas Mavericks when they stunned the Miami Heat in the 2011 NBA Finals with Dirk Nowitzki, and I don't know who the heck their second best player was. I mean, basically a bunch of guys from the used up garage shop. That's where all of them came from, probably. And he orchestrated the shocker in the 6 games in that particular finals. That's why I'm not quick to write this particular series off, because I think Rick Carlisle, who's been in this situation before, it's in 2011, he'll probably have this guys ready to go. I mean, I know Tyrese Halliburton is very streaky. He had moments where he's going to light up the scoreboard and take over games, but then he had moments where you're going to throw things at him because he doesn't show up. It's going to come down to what Pascal Siakam do against a very, very deep Oklahoma City front line and a defense that was locking teams up at home throughout the playoffs. I think their average margin of victory was close to 28 points per game at home, which is a crazy number. They have guys that can do it on both ways, two-way players across the board. Of course, you talk about Chet Holmgren, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and Lou Dort, among others, for Oklahoma City. It's essentially going to come down to what Pascal Siakam is going to do against that front line of Oklahoma City. So I'm taking Oklahoma City because of the home court. I think it's 5 games. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes to a 6th, but I'm not going to be too quick to say it's a sure thing, because we saw Rick Carlisle, their head coach, do the same thing in Dallas when they shocked Miami in the 2011 NBA Finals, and he could do this again. I'm not saying he is. It's possible, because Rick Carlisle knows the game better than people think. I mean, he's always been one of the premier coaches for the longest time, especially in the 21st century when we had other guys like Eric Spoelstra, Greg Popovich, just to name a few. He's done it at this level. He's won it at this level. They're going to have to rely on him, and he's going to have to rely on past experiences to find a way to get Indiana to shock this one off. I mean, it's doable, but in my opinion, I don't think it is. I think Oklahoma City is just too deep, plays very well at both ends. I think this is a matchup nightmare for Indiana. Give me Oklahoma City in 5, but I'm not going to quick to write off Indiana just simply because Rick Carlisle, as a head coach, did it before in Dallas when he shocked Miami. It could happen again. Not saying it will, but it could. Could and will are 2 different things. And speaking of the NBA, when the series concluded, it was the end of a 36-year magnificent run for the NBA on TNT. Well, first of all, I said that the contract they just got into, I think, is an absolute bunch of garbage. I mean, they're going to NBC and ESPN, which I think is just absolutely a joke, because that's what the NBA likes. Always brought fair analysis, always brought the fair situations when it comes to all of this. And I just want to say, if I can move on here real quick, it's just sad to see it end like this because when you always think about the NBA and TNT, especially the post game show with Ernie, Kenny, Charles, and Shaq, it was always the one thing everyone wanted to watch. I mean, the thing about them was they were themselves. If ESPN allows them to be themselves, have at it. I would enjoy it. But who knows what ESPN is going to do because we know what ESPN is made of when it comes to all of this. Because at the same time, let's see what's going on here. I think I lost my mic again. Nope, guess not. When you talk about what's going on with all of this, because it's just weird that they would do this. And I'll say this also. I enjoyed these four guys simply because, they were themselves. They enjoyed, making lighthearted stuff out of the game and just enjoyed being in the seat. My favorite part, obviously, is when you guys, when they took to the whole police scandal in 2018 where the Clippers called the cops on the Houston Rockets because Chris Paul was going to beat up Blake Griffin. I mean, and Barkley and Shaq just laughed at the whole thing. Of course, you can forget, after New Orleans laid an egg to the Thunder last season, Barkley telling everyone Galveston, among many others. Shaq tripping over the set to get to the main board over there in Atlanta. It was a fun show. And hopefully, wherever they go to, they can let them be themselves. That was probably my favorite thing when it comes down to the NBA on TNT, especially on Inside the NBA. They can be themselves. They didn't take their jobs too seriously. They were just, they just enjoyed it simply because that's who they were at the end of the day. I mean, much love to all four of them. And hopefully ESPN will let them do what they did over at TNT because that's what made that show work and made the show fun. They talked about highlights. They talked about basketball. You can call them old heads all you want because they've been in this situation many times before. But it was a fun show, and hopefully ESPN will let them do their thing. That's going to be my thing with this. Some things just have to come to an end, I guess. I hate to see this one end. It was the show as I was growing up because there was a time when the big games was on TNT on Tuesday night, Thursday night. And when the playoff coverage hit, it was next level stuff. I mean, they did a better job of some of these so-called networks and so-called specialists do on these networks for the longest time. I mean, the who's who that called games. You talk about Marv Albert, Kevin Harlan, Dick Stockton, analysts like Hubie Brown, Doug Collins, just to name a few, the czar Mike Fratello. The who's who came through that network, made that the most premier and the most watched basketball program for the NBA for the longest time. And they entered such a garbage contract when it comes to what happened with the NBA. And that's what happened at the end of the day. So good luck with us. Now to the world of boxing. Actually, before I proceed on the historical perspective, it'd be remiss if I didn't give a final farewell to one of the supreme technicians to come out of Jamaica, the great Mike the Body Snatcher McCallum. One of the most underrated technicians and one of the more underrated fighters to ever step foot in the boxing ring. I mean, his place in history is secure. 3 divisions, he won a world championship. Known for vicious body attack that would take your legs out. He'll wear you out before he puts you out. Had an epic 2-fight series in 91 and 1992 against the great James Lights Out Tony. And the first fight was just high-level technical stuff between 2 old-school fighters who just put on a display of sweet science beauty in Atlantic City in 1991 that ended in a draw. And the second fight, was just as great as the first. One of the more avoided fighters was Mike McCallum, just for the simple reason that he was basically viewed from the bigger names at the time was like a high-risk, low-reward kind of fighter. A high risk being because his skill set was a nightmare for anyone who fought him, but it wasn't going to amount to anything for them in the financial field. Especially we talk about guys like Leonard Hearns and Duran avoiding him for those reasons. Some people say Hagler. I wouldn't go that far, but definitely because he was a mandatory for both Hearns and Duran before that fight in '84. The thing for McCallum was luckily Duran was forced to vacate the title to take the Hearns fight because it was a mandatory they had to fulfill. Now, of course, in 1991, prior to that first fight against James Toney, that same organization stripped McCallum for not wanting to fight Stevie Collins, a fighter he beat convincingly a couple years before that happened. But Mike McCallum was a pure technician, a purist in the ring, technically sound, brought it all against some of the upper elite opposition, and just fought the best at their very best. And certainly a tough loss for the boxing community today. A terrific fighter, probably the greatest fighter to come out of Jamaica. We consider, you don't really have much of a history there. I know Trevor Berbick was Jamaican, but being the first world champion from Jamaica when he beat Sean O'Malley in 1984, to the night he beat Donald Curry with that wild left hook that flattened Curry in 87. And from that point forward, McCallum's place in history was secure. On his way out after he lost the 2 fights to James Toney, managed to win a light heavyweight championship from the tough and durable Jeff Harding in 1994 when he fought in Bismarck, North Dakota. So just a great fighter all around, well accomplished, a guy that some of the top fighters wanted to avoid or stole out for the longest time because he was a matchup problem, especially when it comes to that body attack, that when he delivered body punches, that was all she wrote. So may God rest the soul of the great Mike McCallum, an all-time great junior middleweight and middleweight. Definitely up there in the junior middleweight division, especially after he won the title, blasting through guys like Julian Jackson and Donald Curry, just to name a few. His place in history, signed, stamped, sealed, and delivered. May God rest the soul of the great Mike McCallum. Now to historical aspect today. And one of them is, we're going to go way back with this one. This is going to take place 88 years ago today in Madison Square Garden. History was made, probably history in the sense that probably will never be touched. It was the featherweight champion Henry Armstrong moving up to welterweight. Remember, this is 20 pounds difference from 126 to 147 to fight the standout all-time great welterweight champion Barney Ross. In a fight where basically it was Ross's last fight, and Henry Armstrong just did anything and everything he could to win the undisputed welterweight championship at a time when the undisputed championship was just a one-belt era where one belt is a winner-take-all proposition. I bring this up because the royalty that Henry Armstrong put himself in during this time. He won the featherweight championship. 9 months after that, he goes and chases Barney Ross, one of the premier all-time greats at that time, and Ross's place in history is secure. Henry Armstrong just made him look like an amateur that night, made all kinds of adjustments, changed the style right to his fitting, and to where he would beat Barney Ross convincingly going away. And on this particular night, Henry Armstrong not only they let him keep the featherweight championship, but he added the welterweight championship to it. And 9 months after that, he would move back down to lightweight and win the lightweight championship, being the first to ever hold lineal world championships in 3 weight divisions simultaneously, something that's never going to be broken. I'm not talking about the political aspect of the sport today because we know how it is. I'm talking about when one belt, winner takes all at the time, and that's what he did in 3 separate weight divisions. And when you won that one belt, he was basically the undisputed champion. When you talk about the ultra elite, not just in boxing history, but in athletics and sports history, he's up there for that reason. To go from featherweight from 126 to go up to 147 and then come back down to 135 to win world titles in roughly a year to a year and a half, the way Henry Armstrong did, that puts him way up there. And basically, he's going to be basically untouchable forever. And his resume, that resume alone just puts him up there. I mean, he, at a time when those divisions didn't get any real glamour. I mean, you had a Willie Pep, you had a Sadie Sadler, you had a Sam Langford, you even had a Barney Ross, the guy he beat for the welterweight title, among others. Henry Armstrong just cleaned it out. I mean, there's no other way to slice it up. His place in history is secure. He began his march before that when he won the featherweight championship. To go from featherweight to welterweight to win this championship, to go up 26 pounds from 126 to 47, and to come down 12 pounds to lightweight within a year at a time when, you know, that sort of thing, no one complained about weight cuts or weight losses or catch weights. He just said, put the pen to the paper, I'll make the weight, and I'll win the title. That's what he did 3 times within a year. And this place in history, that's going to be forever untouched. And Barney Ross was a stellar fighter in the lightweight, welterweight divisions. I mean, himself, 3-division world champion. At the time, no one considered his junior welterweight title relevant because no one recognized the junior welterweight division. But when you talk about 3-division world champions, Barney Ross, Henry Armstrong, they were the first 2 to achieve that feat at a time when no one would go 3 divisions. Back then, 2 divisions was basically a significant accomplishment back then. Armstrong and Ross broke the barriers. For Armstrong to make that record, he had to beat Barney Ross 88 years ago today at Madison Square Garden, and he did it. And his place in history is secure. It turned out to be the last fight in the great career of Barney Ross. Stellar career, went to become a World War II veteran afterward, among many other things. Also an actor. But a terrific fighter was Barney Ross. Just basically ran out of gas when he fought the great Henry Armstrong. And I've always said my Mount Rushmore of all-time boxers will always be Sugar Ray Robinson, Muhammad Ali, Joe Louis, the 4th member, Homicide Hank Armstrong. There's a reason why they called him Homicide Hank. You guys can probably read the documentaries and see the footage. It's out there. Guy was just a phenom. And I close on another one. This was on the middle of probably the longest reign at the time in middleweight championship history. It was Carlos Monzon getting a unanimous decision in his rematch with the great Emil Griffith. Emil Griffith was a very stout fighter, won world titles at won the world title many times at welterweight and middleweight. And basically, this is a rematch of a fight that took place a year before where he was stopped by Monzon. And this was in the middle of Carlos Monzon's 14 successful title defenses, which was the record for the longest time, which was eventually broke by Bernard Hopkins in 2001. In this particular fight, I mean, Carlos Monzon showed he was just more than just a rugged Argentine fighter. He basically had some skill and speed and basically utilized it to beat the very great and very tough Emil Griffith in a fight that basically went to 15-round distance, and Monzon was credited with the win in Monte Carlo. Carlos Monzon, probably the greatest fighter to come out of Argentina. He really is. I mean, talk about guys like Sergio Martinez, Victor Galindez, Juan Roldan, among many others that come out of that country. Also, some of the better South American fighters. We talk about Yetter Jofre out of Brazil, just to name several of them. Maybe the greatest to come out of the continent of South America. And we talk about the Latino communities, you include Mexico, Latin America, Puerto Rico, etc. Definitely a top 10 fighter. I mean, he had the record for the longest time at middleweight. It was the one Marvin Hagler was chasing, but couldn't get it when he lost to Sugar Ray Leonard. It was eventually broken by Bernard Hopkins, who we know just succeeded to 20 successful title defenses. And Emil Griffith was a very stout, strong fighter, fought a lot of top guys during his time. We talk about not just Monzon, he holds two victories over the great Dick Tiger, which is a tough thing to do during those times because Tiger was a difficult proposition for anyone. Griffith beat him twice. Actually, the second one, he sent Tiger into retirement because that was Tiger's last fight. You talk about beating a guy like Benny Briscoe, who was a very good fighter, gave tough fights to Lucif Hamani out of France, Vito Antuofermo, known for his fight with Marvin Hagler, before he ended his career with a points loss in Monaco to the tough and durable Alan Minter. A very, very good fighter was himself, Emil Griffith, won the middleweight championship 3 times, had a trilogy with Nino Beneventi, 2 fights with Joey Archer. His place in history was secure, but ran into one of the premier all-time great middleweights, probably a top 5 all-time middleweight in Carlos Monzon, who basically was just the king of the crop among many others at the time. Carlos Monzon, we look at his overall record. Again, he himself fought Nino Beneventi twice, mentioned the 2 wins over Griffith, beat Benny Briscoe, and had a tough fight with Jose Napoles. Finished his career with exactly 100 career fights. 87, 3-9 was a record. A no contest was thrown in there. But still, his place in middleweight history is secure. And just a top 5 all-time great middleweight. We know about the wild and chaotic situations with him outside the ring and the tragic ending under odd circumstances. I won't divulge into that. But Carlos Monzon, you talk about a top 5 all-time great middleweight. Definitely the greatest to come out of Argentina. We talk about those kind of fighters that had, Juan Roldan and Victor Galindez, just to name a couple. and his place among Latino fighters history, definitely up there. Maybe the top 10, bottom half of the top 10, maybe, because we talk about South America. That's part of the Latin American community and the Latino community for the longest time. From the continent of South America, probably number one. The only one that may have a say to with him was Eder Joffre, the bantamweight who came out of Sao Paulo, Brazil, and had just a miraculous run. But he had those 2 losses of fighting Harada. Doesn't assert the fact that Joffre was probably the greatest bantamweight of all time. But that's the legacy of the great Carlos Monzon. I mean, terrific fighter. 2 great fights, him and Griffith. Griffith was a standout fighter. The thing is, I've always said when we talk about great fighters getting into certain matchups where they're in over their head, doesn't deter the fact that the fighter that loses was a good fighter. That's the case here with Emil Griffith, and I said before with Barney Ross and his loss to Henry Armstrong, they were just phenomenal fighters. I mean, they're phenomenal. Henry Armstrong is boxing royalty, and Carlos Monzon just had a record that looked like it was never going to be touched until Bernard Hopkins broke it in 2001. That to tell you the legacies of both Ross and Griffith, they just ran into elite all-time greats. And as I said about with Henry Armstrong, and I concluded with this, everyone thinks winning a world title in the sport of boxing is a big deal. It's not. Okay? It's not anymore. The political aspect of it, the ratings manipulation has just destroyed and watered down the credibility of the sport to where whatever it is you do, it's basically watered. That's what it is. That's why I don't give credit to people winning world titles. I don't give people giving credit to undefeated records today as it meant back then, simply because everything gets nitpicked and it gets ruined. And the political aspect of the sport when it comes to promoters and the governing bodies, it just took it down to the lowest of low levels to a point to where it's just watered and used up. And we get bad and negative perceptions, and it's been this way for the better half of 3 to 4 decades. Even you can go way back to when Sonny Liston was fighting and we had the mob on him. That is where I had the end game with the sport for the longest time, because that's why I single out champions as fake world champions, not because of the fighters, because of how the governing bodies have run the organization and the sport and run it down to the ground, and the fact that nobody is calling it out and no one's doing anything about it. There's a problem, and that's why I've distanced myself from a lot of you guys, because when I covered this, 3 division world champs, 4 division world champs, it meant something. I mean, because there was a time, it was like a first at the times. I mean, I remember when Tommy Hearns became the first to win 4 world titles, later followed up by Leonard winning 5 world titles under weird circumstances with that governing body. I'm not giving it the time of day for it. But people act like winning 3 and 4 division world titles is a significant thing these days. It's not. If you go 3 times undisputed, like a guy like Nayo Inoue did, and Terrence Crawford may do, okay, we'll have a conversation. It's not worth it, because the political aspect of the sport, the governing bodies as they are, just took this thing, watered it out, and to where whatever happens is basically irrelevant at this point, and I'm not giving it the time of day anymore. That's why I stick to this aspect, because a lot of you guys think winning a belt means something. It doesn't. It's not like back then when it was only 1 belt and it got passed around. Actually, went to the 2-belt era, which I didn't have a problem with. 2 belts, put them as undisputed. Winner takes all. That's what championship boxing was back in the day. Are we going to get back to those days? No. Why? Because everyone has their own agenda. Everyone has their own narrative. Everyone's doing this for all the wrong reasons. That's the problem. Maybe one of these days this week, I might have to call this out a little more, because some people in the boxing community who I talk with and deal with still doesn't understand it. They give governing bodies a time of day when they don't. Because I told you guys countless times, when you put all those letters, those governing body letters in your posts, in your tweets, you're giving them credibility and you're supporting their crooked act. That's the problem. That is a major problem. And that is where the line has to be drawn. You can't just give any these guys any kind of credit or any kind of recognition anymore just because they have hold a 3-letter belt here or a 3-letter belt there. Doesn't mean anything. It doesn't, because it's just destroyed. And I'm sorry I crossed that route, but anybody remember what happened 26 years ago When one of these organizations was brought into a federal court and was exposed hook, line, and sinker, stripped down to the little butt nakedness over there in New Jersey when they were sentenced to prison, it's still going on, but nobody wants to do anything about it. Stop giving governing bodies credibility. Stop putting the letters of these bills in your posts, in your tweets, because it's not helping it at all. That's where you guys have become a problem. And it might be time for me to start to speak up a little bit because I've never been a fan of them. Remember when HBO had World Championship Boxing way back when, and they stopped mentioning the letters in their, pre-fight, pre-screen, whatever the heck you want to call it, to prop up the fight. Everybody should be starting to do that, because I've done it a long time ago. Giving governing bodies a time of day isn't worth it because they're a bunch of crooked schmucks. Stay away from the governing bodies. Just stick to the fights and just enjoy it. I'll be talking more about this way, way later. And that'll wrap up this edition of Sirhan on X. I will be back tomorrow night. Actually, if you follow me on the X platform, I will also be on an NFL space. I have a handful of them coming up this week, so I will be a busy man. And if you missed this particular show or any ones I've had in the past, you can catch them on the Apple Podcasts, the iHeartRadio, and the Spotify apps, as well as all the social media platforms, X, Facebook, Rumble, Instagram, and Kick. Actually, shout out to you guys on Kick. I see you guys out there tonight. And I always conclude by saying one thing to all you newcomers out there on Kick. Always make self-care your number one priority in life. If you take care of yourself first, good things will come your way. If you don't take care of yourself first, nothing else in life matters. Always focus on you. Always take care of yourself. Good night. Take care. Take care of yourselves first, and God bless.